In this module, we're going to talk about controlling user access. Keep in mind, in this chapter, really you cannot do most of the activity because it's a fake or production box, and just you have to watch what I'm going to explain. I try to log into the system and do a couple examples so you can see those. But most of the activity that you're supposed to creating a user or assigning a privilege, granting a privilege, you cannot do any of those activity because we're using a production server, and if you mess up, you're gonna mess up everybody, user account and system access. Imagine an Oracle database and a database administrator that watching the activity of all other users that they create. And look at the user, they have the read permission, they have the write permission, they have the privilege to create view or different object on their schema object or on their user account. And this activity assigned by the administrator or by the system, which is we call that one administrator. Let's go a little bit more detail. Let's look at right here. Oracle consists of some privilege, system privilege, and this system privilege, there are system security and data security. System security is the ability who can log in, who should be logging, his ability to log in terminated, who should have the permission to create a table, create a view, or all the objects that so far we work in the database. And what object, what level should we give right to a user to access to that one. So let's put it, all these are system security. The other part is the data security. Data security come to the portion that you have access to a read, you have access to one column, you have to access a table, you have to access to a procedure, function, or let's say object privilege. So you have some type of object privilege. In the system security level, you are allowed the user to create, which we call it a schema. A schema, by the way, is a collection of objects such as table, view, sequence, synonym. All these are, that's what we call it, object. So we are the system allowed to create a user. That user have the guarantee, have the right to assign different activity to different user. So that's going to be higher level privilege for user. Now, in the privilege area that we are talking about, more than 100 privileges are available to the system, which is a DBA administrator has the highest level of the privilege of this more than 100. The system has some of the privilege which internally solving, shutdowning or backing up some activity in the system, which even the DBA does not have those access. So the system has more than 100 different privilege, which is the DBA next to the system has the highest level of the privilege. Here is a simple format of creating a user that the administrator or a user which has higher privilege, he can create a user. Let me show you the user that I created for your database and normally you are accessing daily. Here are the basic format that I create your user. I'm going to say create user DE45801 identified by. Password is DE45, but as soon as I created all default account user, I'm going to change those passwords. So far, if you notice, I didn't change the password. On the chapter 1, I did not change the password on DE45801. So I create a table, and this table, I create a user, and this user, the password of this user DE45801, this user using a table space, and that table space is ITS E1345, and you're going to use a temporary table space, which is temporary table space is temp. And by this method, I create all the user. After all the user created, we start giving a grant permission to the user. What the user they can do. The user can create view, the user can create sequence, synonym, create session. Let's go an example. So administrator has the permission to grant create session, create table, create sequence, create view. This all privilege we're going to say assign it to DE45A01. As you're going to see in right here, I connect to the database, but this time I'm not DE45A01, but I am the sys user. The sys user is the administrator user and has the highest number of the privilege. Let me use this option to grant to a user DE45A01 to create session, create table, create sequence, create view, everything. Or let's change this one to DE45A25 because this is better. I'm going to using a default use. So without knowing the password of DE45A25, I can ask as a sys to grant those privilege to DE45A25. As you see, I right click and paste and the grant succeeded. So I gave this privilege to user DE45A25. Now DE45A25, now he cannot create a session. What I mean by session, he can log in. He can create a table, he can create a sequence, and he can create a view. That's all he can do. Now I can grant std role to DE45A25, and DE45A25 he gonna have all this privilege, as you're gonna see right here in this screen. He gonna have all this privilege. Here's the sample. I'm gonna grant and grant succeeded. Now user DE45A25, he has all this privilege you're gonna see in this screen. All this privilege. Said we have system privilege, we have the role, we can create role, and we can object privilege, as you're gonna see in this slide. Also we have spoke about how to create the user. You only create a user and give him a password. The only privilege that you can alter your user ID, alter user DE45A25 identified by any password that you want. But I'm not going to execute this command. But when you put a semicolon and execute it, it generates a new user with the new password. In this scenario, for example, it's a password that always you can remember. That's the only privilege so far that you have. You have also the ability to create a view, table, sequence, synonym, and just name. The other privilege that you have, already we spoke about system security. We spoke about that we have more than 100 privilege, and removing a table, removing a user, backing up table. Well, these are the permission that DBA has, and also user has majority of it. Here is the format of creating a user. Here is the format of the grant privilege that you have. This is the syntax of the privilege. Grant privilege to user or role or to public. Public is a scenario that you're going to give it to all users regardless of who they are. But that's not a very usual way. Normally you assign it to a role or to a user and then guarantee that role to some other user. Here's a sample of the grant that already we spoke about. Here's the example of the role. When you have a role, you don't have this difficulty, all this privilege for single user to different privilege, make the life much more easier. Instead of the manager, we use std role. Here's the example of creating a role. Here is the granting the role, grant the privilege to a role, and here is the granting that privilege, that role to a user. Here's the only right that you can do in this chapter by altering a user demo identified by employee. You can change your password. Here is a table object privilege. You can alter a table. View does not have alter. You can alter a sequence, and you can delete, index, insert, reference, select, and update. As you can see, these are all privileges available to all users. Here is again the privilege that we have, passing only one your privilege. Also, you have a right to give a guarantee to other user to access your table. For example, you can say grant select on employee table to DE45A07. So you can grant whatever privilege that you have to another user, or to a public. You can guarantee whatever privilege you have, you can give it to other user. This is another one that you also have in this chapter. Here are the data dictionary that all privilege available, we can access those privilege which is available. There are role system privilege, role table privilege. Some of this privilege and some of this data dictionary, they are not accessible by default user. Only the DBA has access. But you have user column privilege, you have column privilege, you have most of them, but some of them which is back to the system, you don't have the privilege to access those data dictionary. Finally, you can remove a privilege that you already guarantee to a user, and the command to do that one is revoke the privilege. Revoke privilege all on a specific object from a specific user. Cascade constraint, you can put cascade, so if he assign that privilege to another user, you can cascade remove that privilege too. Here's the example: remove select insert on department table from demo from DE45A01 example.